All right, everyone, it is time to start a new unit in math. So out with the ratios, in with the percentages. This is our introduction to percentages. So in this video, you're going to learn how to understand what a percent is, look at how we can represent it visually, what the word percent really means, and we're going to explore the connection between percents and fractions, as well as percents and decimals. So what does percent really mean? When we are saying percent, we're saying per 100. You all are bilingual, so you know that cent is close to ciento, or 100. So think about that when we look at these pictures. In the first picture, you'll see 1% shaded. Just 1 per 100 squares is shaded. 1% is a very small amount. In the next box, you'll see 50% shaded. 50 of those squares are green, so 50% of the box is shaded. 25 means 25 per 100. In the top box, you'll notice 25 of those boxes are green, so 25% is green. In the bottom, the whole box is green, which means all 100 out of 100 are green, or 100% is green. Now let's look at it in a real example. There are 100 seats in a theater. 54 seats are occupied. We can say 54 out of 100 seats are occupied. We can also say that 54% are occupied. We can use a symbol of two circles with a line coming through it as percent, or we can use the word percent. Okay? Now let's see how we can use this to compare quantities. In problem B, the whole is divided into 100 equal parts. 60 out of 100 equal parts are red. 60% of the whole is red. Notice the term equal parts there. Because 60 out of the 100 parts were red, we could say that was 60%. 40 out of 100 parts are not red, so 40% of the whole is not red. Remember that percent always means out of 100. So if we divide a 100th square, or the whole 100, into two different parts, those parts need to add up to create 100 equal parts. Okay? In that case, we knew that 60 plus 40 equaled 100. So once we knew 60% were red, we knew 40% were not red, because 60 plus 40 equals 100. Now let's try a trickier example. The whole in part C is divided into 100 equal parts. 27 out of 100 of those parts are green. How many percent are green? Remember, percent just means out of 100. So if 27 out of 100 are green, then 27% are green. Now that we know 27% are green, we can figure out how many are not green by thinking through that addition phrase. 27 plus what gives me 100? Because every single time the groups in the percent have to add up to 100. We could also flip this to solve the mystery and use a subtraction phrase to find the missing number. So if 27 plus something gives us 100, 100 minus 27 should give us that mystery term. So I want you to do the subtraction on that one and figure out how much of the whole in part C is not green, if we know that 27% is green. We can use hundredth squares, or a square that's 10 by 10 and divided into 100 equal parts in order to visualize percentages. I'm not going to do all of these for you, but I want to help you out and see how we can use visualization to estimate percents. When I look at square A, hundredth square A, I can tell that more than half of it is shaded. So now I'm going to use another trick to count and see how many percent are actually shaded. So we think that it's going to be between 50 and 100 because we know that more than half of it is shaded. Now in a hundredth square, every single column and every single row has 10 equal parts. It is a 10 by 10 perfect square. So I don't have to count every single little block in this hundredth square. I can count the columns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 6 complete columns of 10 shaded squares. So at least 60% of the 100th square is shaded. I noticed that that 7th column is not complete. So less than 70% of the 100th square is shaded. I want you to finish counting to determine how many percent between 60% and 70% of this 100th square A is shaded. Now in 100th square B, just looking at it, I notice about half of it is shaded. But I'm going to count to check my work. Remember that in each row, there are exactly 10 equal squares. So I'm going to count the shaded rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And looky there, 5 completely shaded rows means that 50% of the 100th square is shaded because 5 times 10 gives us 50. So in B, we know that 50% of the 100th square is shaded. In C, anyone can look at that and notice right away that all 100 of those 100 squares are shaded blue. So that means 100% of the square is shaded. Remember, because percents are always out of 100, if we see that everything is shaded, we know automatically that it's 100%. We don't have to waste our time counting all the boxes one by one. Now that we know what a percent is and how we can look at it, let's think about connections between fractions and percents. We've studied fractions before this year, so I want you to put that fraction hat on as well as learning about some new percents to kind of make connections there. Let's look at 100th square A. In 100th square A, 23 out of 100 equal parts are blue. We could also say 23 hundredths of the whole is blue, if we think about it as a fraction. We know that 23% of the whole is blue. So 23 hundredths is the same as 23%. Notice that hundredths, the denominator, actually means out of 100 equal parts. And 23%, that percent means out of 100. So in this case, 23 hundredths and 23% mean exactly the same thing. Now let's go down to part B for a trickier problem. In this fraction model, we notice that 7 out of 10 equal parts are green. That's 7 tenths. We say tenths because we've divided this whole into 10 equal parts. But we can also make an equivalent fraction, thinking about what would happen if we divided it into 100 equal parts. Well, 10 times 100, 10 times 10 equals 100. 7 times 10 equals 70. So 7 tenths is the same as 70 hundredths. We've learned this before in equivalent fractions. Notice how we multiplied the numerator and the denominator by the same factor to create an equivalent fraction. Now that we have a fraction over the denominator 100, we can easily convert to a percent. 70 over 100, or 70 hundredths, is the same as 70%, because percent really means out of 100. 70% of this whole is green. Remember, I can't say it enough. A percentage is always out of 100. So I want you to try to express these fractions as percents. 45 hundredths is the same as 3 tenths is the same as how many hundredths? Remember, when we start with a fraction that's not over 100, we want to find an equivalent fraction over 100 to make our life so much easier when we convert to a percent. 3 tenths is the same as, very good, and 30 hundredths is the same as, all right, now you can check your work. Now that we have expressed fractions as percents, let's go backwards. Let's try to express percents as fractions. In this drawing, you'll see 100 flowers, some of which are purple and some of which are yellow. 40% of the flowers are yellow. What fraction of the flowers are yellow? Well, when we see 40%, we know that 40 out of every 100 flowers is yellow. So we need to write 40 hundredths in its simplest form. In order to get to simplest form, we need to divide both terms of the fraction by the same factor, preferably the greatest common factor, in order to find the simplified form. Now, I know a lot of you are looking at the number 40 and the number 100 and thinking, they both end in 0. I'm going to divide by 10. That's great. But remember, if you don't divide by the greatest common factor, you might need to divide again. So let's divide by 10 and then check our work to see if we finish simplifying. 40 hundredths. We're going to divide both terms by 10. 40 divided by 10 is 4. 100 divided by 10 is 10. So we get 4 tenths. But 4 tenths can be simplified. 4 and 10 are both even numbers, so we need to divide by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So we get 2 fifths. 2 fifths of the flowers are yellow. Now let's look back to our drawing. Do you notice that these 100 flowers are divided into 5 equal parts? And of those 5 equal parts, 2 of them are yellow. 2 fifths of the flowers are yellow. We can find our answer in math and look back to the problem to make sure we've got it. Fractions can be simplified, but when you express something as a percentage, it's always out of 100. Try expressing each of these percents as a fraction in the simplest form. So in problem A, we've already done part of the work for you. 10% is the same as 10 out of 100. But how can I divide that by their greatest common factor? Look at the factors of 10, which are 1, 2, 5, and 10. Notice the biggest one can be divided into 100, so we're going to divide by 10. I'm going to help you find the greatest common factors, and then you can check your work on the next page. 5% is the same as 5 out of 100. The factors of 5 are 1 and 5. 100 can be divided by 5, so we should divide by 5 to find that simplest form. 75% is the same as 75 out of 100. The factors of 75 are many, but the biggest ones are 75, then we can't divide by 2, but we could divide by 3, and 25. 100 is not divisible by 75, but we can divide it by 25. So let's divide 75 and 100 by 25 to find the simplest form. In the next problem, we have 8%, which is the same as 8 out of 100. 100 is not divisible by 8, but it is divisible by the next smallest factor, 4. So let's divide both numbers by 4 to find your simplest form. Pause here until you've finished, and then on the next slide you can check. All right, there's your answers to check your work. Now let's try one last thing. We're going to express percents as decimals. Now you haven't gone over decimals this year, but you've learned about them last year. A decimal can be presented as a 0 with a point and some numbers following it. When we write 43 as a decimal, 43% as a decimal, we get 43 hundredths, or 0.43. I want you to notice the pattern here. The digits in the numerator of our fraction, or the 2 digits in front of our percent symbol, become the first 2 digits after the decimal point. So I want you to try this on your own following this pattern. First, make a fraction over 100, and then translate that into the decimal. With the decimals, just be careful about place value and about the zeros. Okay? In C and D, you might have some questions about that. Hit me up on Hangouts to ask any more. Now, I want to finish this video so it doesn't get too long. In this video, you've learned that percent means out of 100. We can use a shaded hundredth square to represent percents visually. Percents, fractions, and decimals are connected. Percents use this symbol. Percent is always expressed out of 100, and a percent can easily be converted to a decimal or a fraction, which is expressed in hundredths. Thank you for enjoying, and I hope you enjoyed your introduction to percents.